On a cold desert highway outside Bakersfield, where the asphalt meets endless darkness, motorcycle headlights cut through the night like judgment itself. Most people would have driven past the crumpled figure lying in the gravel, dismissing it as another casualty of a world gone hard. But Marcus Steele Rodriguez wasn't most people. The Hells Angels patch on his leather jacket told one story, but his weathered hands told another as they gently lifted the broken young woman from the roadside. Her mother had left her there to die, beaten and discarded like yesterday's trash. What happened next would challenge everything the world believed about bikers, family, and redemption. In a brotherhood known for violence and rebellion, one man would discover that the greatest act of defiance was choosing love over hatred. But could a man with blood on his hands truly save someone else's soul? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Crossroads Clubhouse sat like a fortress of chrome and concrete on the outskirts of Bakersfield, where the desert began its long stretch toward nowhere. Inside, the air hung thick with cigarette smoke and the lingering scent of motor oil that seemed to seep from the very walls. Marcus Steele Rodriguez pushed through the heavy oak doors, his boots echoing against the worn wooden floors that had witnessed decades of brotherhood. Betrayal and blood, the main room buzzed with its usual evening energy. Diesel Thompson, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, hunched over a pool table, lining up a shot with the precision of a surgeon. His beard, streaked with premature grey, caught the amber light from the overhead lamps. Across the room, Jimmy Ghost Castellanos nursed a whiskey at the bar, his pale eyes scanning the room with the wariness of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "Steele's back," called out Mama Rosa from behind the kitchen counter, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been feeding hungry bikers for 20 years. Rosa wasn't technically a member, but she ran the clubhouse kitchen like a general commanding troops, and every man in the place knew better than to cross her. Her greying hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her apron bore the stains of 1,000 meals served with equal parts love and discipline. Steele nodded to his brothers, but something in his posture suggested his mind was elsewhere. The weight of the unconscious woman in his arms still lingered in his memory, the way her broken body had felt so fragile against his chest. He'd left her with Doc Chen, but the image of her battered face haunted him like a ghost from his past. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," Diesel observed, setting down his pool cue. "What's eating at you, brother?" Steele pulled off his leather jacket, revealing the plain black t-shirt underneath. Hidden beneath the fabric, pressed against his chest, were the dog tags he'd worn through 3 tours in Afghanistan. Most of his brothers knew he'd served, but few understood the depth of what those metal discs represented. They carried the names of friends who'd never made it home, the coordinates of battles that would never appear in history books, and the weight of decisions that had saved lives and taken others. "Found someone on Highway 58, Steele said simply, accepting the beer that Ghost slid across the bar. A young woman beaten half to death. Left for dead." The room fell quiet. In their world, violence was often a necessary evil, but violence against women crossed a line that even hardened bikers respected. These men lived by a code that outsiders rarely understood. They might break the law, might settle disputes with fists or worse, but they protected the innocent with the same fierce loyalty they showed each other. "Cops involved?" Ghost asked, his voice careful and measured. "Not yet. Took her to Doc Chen. She's stable, but—" Steele paused, taking a long pull from his beer. "Someone did this intentionally. Someone who wanted her to suffer." Diesel's massive hands clenched into fists. "You thinking what I'm thinking? That whoever did this might come looking for her." "Yeah, I'm thinking exactly that." Rosa emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Despite her grandmotherly appearance, Rosa had survived 40 years, married to the club's former president, before cancer took him. She understood the complexities of their world better than most. "Where is she now?" "Doc's keeping her overnight for observation. Said she'll need somewhere safe to recover. Somewhere people won't ask too many questions." The implication hung in the air like smoke. The clubhouse had served as sanctuary before for those who needed protection from a world that had failed them. Runaway kids, battered wives, witnesses who'd seen too much, they'd all found temporary refuge within these walls. You know the rules, Ghost said quietly. Vote of the chapter. Can't make unilateral decisions about club resources. Steele understood. Despite his unofficial leadership role, the Crossroads chapter operated as a democracy. Major decisions required consensus, especially those that might bring unwanted attention from law enforcement or rival groups. I'm not asking for club resources, Steele replied. I'm asking for permission to use my own. Diesel studied his friend's face, recognizing something he'd seen before in their military days. It was the look Steele got when he'd identified a mission worth risking everything for. What aren't you telling us? Steele touched his chest unconsciously, feeling the outline of his dog tags through the fabric. Sometimes you meet someone who reminds you why you came home from the war. Why you survived when others didn't. The room understood. Each man carried his own ghosts, his own reasons for choosing the Brotherhood over conventional society. They'd all seen enough darkness to recognize the rare moments when light broke through. Dr. Sarah Chen's clinic occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district, where questions weren't asked and cash transactions kept everyone comfortable. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Steele carried the unconscious woman through the back entrance. Her body limp in his arms like a broken doll. Sarah looked up from her desk, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd been expecting him. In the 3 years since she'd started providing medical services to the motorcycle community, she'd learned to read the urgency in Steele's voice over the phone. Examination room 2, she said, already pulling on latex gloves. What's the story? Found her on Highway 58, mile marker 43. Looks like she was beaten and left for dead. Steele placed the woman gently on the examination table, stepping back to give Sarah room to work. Sarah's trained eyes immediately catalogued the injuries. Facial bruising consistent with repeated blows, defensive wounds on the forearms, torn clothing suggesting a struggle. She'd seen similar patterns before, usually in domestic violence cases that ended up in the emergency room of the county hospital where she'd completed her residency. Help me get her cleaned up, Sarah said, reaching for sterile saline solution. I need to assess the full extent of the damage. As they worked, Steele found himself studying the woman's face. Beneath the bruising and swelling, she appeared to be in her early 20s, with auburn hair matted with dried blood. Her hands were small but calloused, suggesting she wasn't afraid of hard work. Most striking were her fingernails, broken and dirty, evidence of a desperate fight for survival. Concussion for sure, Sarah murmured, checking the woman's pupils with a penlight. Possible fractured ribs, extensive bruising to the torso and limbs. Whoever did this was thorough. Steele's jaw tightened. His military training had taught him to recognize interrogation wounds, the systematic application of pain designed to break someone's will. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated cruelty. Sarah continued her examination, documenting each injury with clinical precision. When she reached the woman's left hand, she paused. There's something here. Looks like she was holding on to something. She carefully pried open the clenched fingers, revealing a small, golden locket, its surface stained with dried blood. The delicate chain had left indentations in the woman's palm, where she'd gripped it during her ordeal. Family photo, maybe, Sarah suggested, but the locket was too damaged to open safely without proper tools. Steele took the locket, feeling its weight in his palm. Such a small thing to cling to in the face of such brutality. She held onto this through everything. Must be important. I'm going to start an IV, get some fluids into her. She's dehydrated and probably hasn't eaten in days. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, finding a vein despite the woman's poor condition. Steele, I have to ask, are you planning to involve the police? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah understood the complexities of their world, the way official involvement could complicate situations that were better handled privately. But she also took an oath to do no harm, which sometimes meant ensuring proper authorities were notified. Not yet, Steele replied. Need to understand what we're dealing with first. Someone did this for a reason. Until I know what that reason is, involving cops might put her in more danger. Sarah nodded, accepting his judgment. She'd learned to trust Steele's instincts about such matters. His military background had given him a unique perspective on threat assessment, and his protection had kept her clinic operating without interference from either criminal elements or overzealous law enforcement. As she worked, the woman began to stir, her eyelids fluttering as consciousness slowly returned. Sarah immediately checked her pulse and breathing, both of which had strengthened considerably since their arrival. "Easy," Sarah said softly as the woman's eyes opened, immediately showing panic and confusion. "You're safe. You're in a medical clinic. This is Steele. He's the one who found you." The woman's gaze darted between Sarah and Steele, her body tensing as fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. She tried to sit up, but Sarah's gentle hand on her shoulder kept her still. "The locket," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you have my locket?" Steele stepped forward, holding the blood-stained jewelry where she could see it. "Right here. You held onto it the whole time." Tears began streaming down her bruised cheeks as she reached for the locket with trembling fingers. "She gave it to me when I was little, before everything went wrong." Sarah placed a white plastic hospital bracelet around the woman's wrist, the kind used to identify patients who couldn't identify themselves. In the space for a name, she wrote simply Jane Doe, followed by the date and time of admission. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently. The woman stared at the ceiling, her eyes distant and haunted. "I don't remember. I don't remember anything except the pain." 3 days passed before the woman's eyes held recognition instead of terror. Steele had maintained a vigil at the clinic, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, leaving only when absolutely necessary. Each time she stirred, he was there, a steady presence in a world that had become nothing but pain and confusion. Sarah had moved her to a private recovery room, away from the main clinic where other patients might ask questions. The space was sparse but clean, with a single window that looked out onto the industrial yard, where Steele's Harley sat gleaming in the afternoon sun. "You don't have to stay," the woman said on the 4th morning, her voice stronger now, but still carrying the weight of exhaustion. "I'm not your responsibility." Steele looked up from the motorcycle magazine he'd been pretending to read. "Maybe not. But someone left you to die on a highway, and until we figure out who and why, you're safer with people who give a damn." She touched the hospital bracelet on her wrist, reading the words Jane Doe with something approaching despair. "I keep trying to remember my name, my real name, but it's like trying to grab smoke." "Trauma can do that," Steele said, setting aside the magazine. "Mind protects itself by forgetting things too painful to remember. Sometimes those memories come back, sometimes they don't." "You sound like you know something about forgetting." Steele's hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where his dog tags lay hidden beneath his shirt. "I know something about wanting to forget. About memories that follow you home, from places you'd rather leave behind." The woman studied his weathered face, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. "Were you a soldier?" "Marine. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Long time ago now." She was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Is that why you stopped? On the highway, I mean. Because you know what it's like to be broken?" Steele considered her question carefully. In his world, showing vulnerability was often seen as weakness, but something about this broken young woman made him want to be honest. "Maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't drive past someone who needed help. The doctors keep asking me questions I can't answer. About family, about where I live, about what happened to me. I remember fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror, but nothing connects." Steele reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the blood-stained locket, placing it gently on the bedside table. "You held on to this through everything. Doc says you wouldn't let go even when you were unconscious." Her fingers traced the delicate gold surface, and for a moment, her eyes showed a flicker of something deeper than confusion. "I remember a woman's voice singing. Lullabies, maybe. And the smell of jasmine perfume. But I can't see her face clearly. Someone who loved you gave you that locket. Someone who wanted you to remember them." Tears began forming in her eyes. "But what if she's the one who did this to me? What if the person I'm trying to remember is the same person who left me to die?" Steele leaned forward in his chair, his voice gentle but firm. "Then we'll deal with that when the time comes. But right now, you need a name. Something to call yourself while you heal. I can't just make up a name. Why not? People do it all the time. Fresh start, new identity. Sometimes that's the only way to move forward. She considered this, her fingers still working the locket surface. What would you call me? Steele thought for a moment, remembering something his grandmother had told him years ago about the power of names, about how they could shape destiny. Emma, it means whole, complete, universal. Emma, she repeated, testing the sound of it. I like that. It feels clean, uncomplicated. Emma it is then. Sarah entered the room carrying a clipboard and a small paper bag. Good morning, Emma. How are you feeling today? Emma looked surprised at hearing her new name spoken aloud, but she smiled slightly. Better, stronger. I have some things for you, Sarah said, setting the bag on the bed. Clean clothes, some basic toiletries. And this, she pulled out a torn piece of paper, yellowed with age. We found this in your jacket pocket. Looks like part of a birth certificate. Emma took the fragment with trembling hands. Most of the document was missing, but she could make out Emma in faded blue ink, along with a birth date from 22 years ago. The rest was illegible or torn away. Emma, she whispered, staring at the paper. That was already my name. Steele felt a chill run down his spine. Looks like you chose well. Or maybe you did, Emma replied, looking at him with new understanding. Maybe some things are meant to be. Emma had been at the clubhouse for exactly 1 week when the past came knocking with fists and fury. She was helping Mama Rosa prepare lunch in the kitchen. Her movements still careful due to healing ribs, when the front door burst open with enough force to rattle the beer bottles behind the bar. The woman who stumbled through the entrance looked like a scarecrow dressed in human clothes. Margaret Holloway's once blonde hair hung in greasy strings around a face that bore the telltale marks of long-term drug abuse. Her clothes hung loose on a frame that had been consumed from the inside out, and her eyes darted around the room with the paranoid intensity of someone who saw enemies in every shadow. "Where is she?" Margaret demanded, her voice a harsh rasp that spoke of too many cigarettes and too much screaming. "Where's my daughter?" Steele rose slowly from his chair at the bar, every muscle in his body coiled for action. Behind Margaret, a man stepped through the doorway, like a shadow made flesh. Tony Vega was everything Margaret wasn't. Well-fed, well-dressed, and radiating the kind of casual violence that came from years of hurting people for money. "You must be the biker who thinks he can steal other people's family," Tony said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested origins south of the border. "Margaret here has been worried sick about her little girl." Emma emerged from the kitchen, her face pale, but her jaw set with determination. The moment Margaret saw her, something shifted in the woman's hollow features. For just an instant, love and desperation flickered in her eyes before being consumed again by the cold hunger of addiction. "Emma, baby, you look so thin. Have they been feeding you? Have they been taking care of you?" Margaret reached into her jacket pocket with shaking hands, pulling out a crumpled photograph. "I brought this. Remember when we took this at the state fair? You were 8. You loved the cotton candy." The photograph showed a younger Emma with bright eyes and a genuine smile, standing next to a woman who barely resembled the hollow shell before them now. In the picture, Margaret looked healthy, happy, maternal. The contrast was heartbreaking. Emma stared at the photograph, and Steele watched as fragments of memory flickered across her face like lightning illuminating a dark landscape. "I remember the fair. I remember you buying me a stuffed elephant. That's right, baby, Mr. Peanuts. You named him Mr. Peanuts." Margaret's voice broke with what might have been genuine emotion. "I've been looking for you everywhere. When you disappeared, I thought something terrible had happened. Something terrible did happen," Emma said quietly. "Someone beat me and left me to die on a highway." Margaret's eyes darted to Tony, then back to her daughter. "That wasn't supposed to happen. Tony said he was just going to talk to you, convince you to come home." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Steele felt his hands clench into fists as the implications became clear. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a collection effort. "Shut up, Margaret," Tony snapped, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "The girl's coming with us, and that's the end of it." "Like hell she is," Diesel growled from across the room. The massive biker had been quietly positioning himself near the pool table. where a collection of very solid wooden cues offered potential weapons. Tony pulled back his jacket just enough to reveal the grip of a pistol tucked into his waistband. "This doesn't concern you, fat man. This is family business. Funny thing about family," Steele said, stepping closer to Emma. "It's not always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most." Margaret looked between her daughter and Steele, confusion and desperation warring in her ravaged features. "Emma, please. I know I made mistakes. I know I wasn't always the mother you deserved. But I'm clean now. I'm getting help. We can be a family again." Emma held up the crumpled photograph, studying the faces of two people who no longer existed. "When was this taken exactly?" "I told you. You were 8. "The date, Mom. What's the date on the back?" Margaret's face went blank, the lie dying on her lips before it could be spoken. Emma turned the photograph over, reading the faded pencil marks on the back. 14 years ago. I'm 22 now, Mom. Where have you been for the last 14 years? The question struck Margaret like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, and for a moment Steele thought she might collapse. But Tony's hand on her shoulder kept her upright, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. "Your mother's been through a rough patch," Tony said smoothly. "But she's family, and family takes care of family." The confrontation ended with Tony's thinly veiled threats and Margaret's tears, but not before Emma made her choice clear. She stood beside Steele, her hand finding his arm, and told her biological mother that she was staying where she felt safe. The words hit Margaret like physical blows, but Tony simply smiled and promised they'd be back with proper legal documentation. After they left, the clubhouse fell into an uncomfortable silence. Steele found Emma sitting alone on the back porch, staring out at the desert where the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The crumpled photograph lay on the table beside her, its edges curled with age and handling. "You don't have to fight for me," Emma said without looking at him. "I'm not your responsibility." Steele settled into the chair beside her, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "Maybe not legally. But responsibility isn't always about what the law says. Tony isn't going to give up. And my mother, she'll do whatever he tells her to do. She's too far gone to make her own decisions anymore. You remember more than you're letting on." Emma nodded slowly. "It's coming back in pieces. The drugs, the men she brought home, the way she'd disappear for weeks at a time. I ran away when I was 16. Been living on my own ever since. What happened on the highway? Tony found me working at a diner in Barstow. Said Mom wanted to see me, that she was clean and getting her life together. I was stupid enough to believe him." Emma's voice carried the weight of self-recrimination. "He didn't take me to see her. He took me to some motel where other men were waiting. When I tried to leave, She touched her ribs gingerly. "Well, you saw what they did." Steele felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same cold fury that had served him well in Afghanistan when dealing with men who preyed on the innocent. "They left you on that highway thinking you were dead, probably hoped I was. Dead girls don't file police reports." Steele stood and walked to an old storage locker at the far end of the porch. From inside, he pulled out a leather jacket much smaller than his own, but crafted with the same attention to detail. The leather was soft and well-maintained, though it showed signs of age. "This belonged to my sister," he said, holding up the jacket. "Maria, she died in a car accident when she was 19. Been carrying this around for 15 years, never knowing why." Emma looked at the jacket with surprise. "I didn't know you had a sister. Don't talk about her much. She was light in a dark world, always seeing the best in people, always believing things could get better." Steele's voice carried a tenderness that few people ever heard. "She would have liked you." He held out the jacket to Emma. "Try it on." Emma stood and slipped her arms into the sleeves. The fit was nearly perfect, as if the jacket had been waiting all these years for her to claim it. The leather was supple and warm, and it carried the faint scent of jasmine perfume. "It fits," she said, running her hands along the sleeves. "Maria always said that when you find family, it fits. Doesn't matter if it's blood or choice, family just fits." Emma looked down at herself in the jacket, seeing something she hadn't seen since before the highway. She looked like she belonged somewhere. "Steele, if you do this, if you really fight for me, there's no going back. Tony isn't just some small-time criminal. The way he carried himself, the way other people responded to him, he's connected to something bigger. You let me worry about Tony and the legal stuff. Courts don't usually side with bikers against biological mothers, even drug-addicted ones. Steele pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Rebecca Martinez. She's a lawyer, specializes in family law. Did some work for the club a few years back when Ghost was fighting for custody of his son. Will she take the case? She will, if I ask her to. Emma zipped up the jacket, feeling its weight settle around her shoulders like armor. Why are you doing this, really? Steele considered the question carefully. In his world, showing too much sentiment was often seen as weakness, but Emma deserved honesty. Because 15 years ago, I couldn't save my sister from a drunk driver, but I can save you from whatever Tony and your mother have planned. And if it costs you everything, your reputation, your standing with the club, your freedom. Steele's smile was grim but determined. Then it costs me everything. Some things are worth the price, Emma nodded, understanding passing between them like a current. Then we fight. We fight, Steele agreed. 2 weeks into her stay at the clubhouse, Emma discovered that being part of a motorcycle family meant more than just acceptance. It meant learning an entirely new way of life, complete with its own rules, traditions, and unspoken codes of conduct. Steele found her most mornings in the garage behind the clubhouse, where a collection of Harleys in various states of repair created a mechanical symphony of possibility. She'd taken to arriving early, before the desert heat became unbearable, drawn by the orderly chaos of tools and parts that somehow made sense in ways the rest of her life didn't. "Hand me that torque wrench," Steele said from beneath his 1995 Softail, his voice muffled by the motorcycle's frame. "The one with the red handle." Emma searched the pegboard until she found the correct tool, noting how each implement had its designated place. Everything in Steele's workspace reflected the same military precision that governed the rest of his life. Tools were clean, organized, and maintained with religious devotion. "How did you know I was interested in this?" she asked, settling cross-legged on the concrete floor beside his workbench. "You've been watching us work for 2 weeks with the look of someone who wants to understand, not just observe." Steele rolled out from under the bike, his hands black with grease but his movements precise. "Besides, Maria used to say that motorcycles were like people. Treat them right, maintain them properly, and they'll take you anywhere you want to go." He reached for a thick, grease-stained manual that lay open on the workbench. The book was ancient by technological standards, its pages yellowed and soft from years of handling. Margin notes in various handwritings created a timeline of ownership, and photographs tucked between pages showed different bikes in different eras. "This manual came with my first Harley," Steele explained, wiping his hands on a rag before carefully turning the pages. "Bought the bike from an old-timer named Rusty who'd owned it for 30 years. He threw in the manual and told me it contained everything I'd ever need to know about keeping a Harley running." Emma leaned forward to examine the book more closely. The pages were filled with detailed diagrams, step-by-step instructions, and handwritten modifications that represented decades of accumulated wisdom. "It's like a family recipe book, but for motorcycles." "Exactly. And like family recipes, the important stuff gets passed down from one generation to the next." Steele pointed to a particular section dealing with engine timing. "See these notes in the margin? That's Rusty's handwriting. And this notation here about carburetor adjustment. That's mine from when I first learned to tune engines." Over the following days, Emma's education expanded beyond mechanical knowledge. Mama Rosa taught her the intricate social dynamics of the clubhouse, explaining how respect was earned rather than demanded, and how loyalty once given was considered sacred. "These men have chosen each other as family," Rosa explained, while they prepared lunch for the dozen members who'd gathered for their weekly meeting. "Blood doesn't make you family. Choice does. Showing up when things get difficult does." Emma learned that the club operated according to a complex hierarchy based on experience, wisdom, and proven loyalty rather than simple seniority. Steele held no official title, but his opinions carried weight because he'd earned respect through actions rather than words. Diesel took responsibility for teaching her self-defense, beginning with basic situational awareness and progressing to practical techniques for someone of her size facing larger opponents. Fighting isn't about being the strongest, he explained during their first lesson. It's about being smart, being prepared, and never giving up. Ghost, despite his intimidating appearance, proved to be an unexpected teacher of strategy and planning. His pale eyes saw patterns and connections that others missed, and he taught Emma to think several moves ahead in any situation. "Tony will be back," Ghost said during one of their conversations on the porch. "Men like him don't accept being told no. When he comes, he'll come prepared. We need to be more prepared." The manual became Emma's constant companion, its pages offering both practical knowledge and a sense of continuity with something larger than herself. She learned to read engine sounds like a musical score, understanding the subtle differences between healthy operation and developing problems. "Listen," Steele said one afternoon as they worked on rebuilding a carburetor. "Every engine has its own voice. Learn to hear what it's telling you, and you'll never be stranded on some lonely highway." As Emma's confidence grew, so did her integration into the club's daily routines. She began attending the evening gatherings, where members shared stories, discussed club business, and reinforced the bonds that held their unconventional family together. "You're different now," Sarah observed during one of Emma's weekly medical checkups. "More grounded. More sure of yourself." Emma nodded, thinking of the manual upstairs in her room, its familiar way to comfort in uncertain times. "I'm learning that family isn't just about where you come from. It's about where you choose to belong." Emma's discovery came by accident, as the most important revelations often do. She'd been cleaning Steele's room as part of her contribution to the clubhouse's daily operations when she knocked over a small wooden box from his dresser. The contents scattered across the floor, like secrets finally demanding to be acknowledged. The Purple Heart Medal lay among other military decorations. Its distinctive purple ribbon faded, but the gold profile of George Washington still clearly visible. Beside it were commendation letters, photographs of young Marines in desert camouflage, and a folded flag that had clearly seen ceremonial duty. Steele found her sitting on his bed, holding the medal with the reverence of someone who understood its significance, even without knowing the full story behind it. "I'm sorry," Emma said immediately. "I was just dusting and the box fell. I wasn't snooping." Steele closed the door behind him and sat beside her on the bed, his expression unreadable. "What do you know about that medal?" "My grandfather had one. Korean War. He never talked about how he earned it, but my grandmother told me it meant he'd been wounded while serving his country." Emma turned the medal over in her hands, noting the weight of the gold and the careful engraving. "This one's from Afghanistan. Second tour. AED outside Kandahar." Steele's voice carried the flat tone of someone recounting facts rather than reliving memories. "Lost 3 men that day, good men. Men with families waiting for them to come home." Emma set the medal carefully back in the box, understanding that she was being trusted with something Steele rarely shared. "Is that why you left the service?" "Partly. Mostly it was because I realized I was better at war than I was at peace. And that scared the hell out of me." Steele picked up one of the photographs, showing a younger version of himself with his arm around a grinning Marine. "This is Tommy Castellanos, Ghost's younger brother. Kid was 19, wanted to be a teacher when he got out." Ghost's brother? Twin brother. Tommy always said Ghost got all the common sense, and he got all the optimism. Steele's smile was tinged with old grief. "Tommy stepped on the same IED that got me. Difference was, he was close enough to the center of the blast." Emma understood now why Ghost carried himself with such careful control, why his pale eyes seemed to see threats everywhere. "That's why Ghost joined the club. To be close to you. We came home together. 2 broken soldiers who'd lost too much and didn't know how to fit into a world that hadn't changed while we were gone." Steele replaced the photograph in the box. "The club gave us purpose again. A different kind of brotherhood, but brotherhood nonetheless." Emma picked up a commendation letter, reading the formal language that praised Steele's leadership under fire and his actions in saving wounded Marines. "You were a hero over there. I was a survivor. There's a difference, is there? You saved people. You brought men home to their families." Steele was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap. "I brought some home. Lost others. The math never balances out, no matter how many medals they give you. Emma had seen this expression before, during the quiet moments when Steele thought no one was watching. It was the look of someone carrying weight that couldn't be shared, guilt that couldn't be reasoned away. Is that why you stopped for me on the highway? Because you couldn't save them? Maybe, or maybe I stopped because someone needed help and I was in a position to provide it. Steele looked at her directly. Does the reason matter? Emma considered this question seriously. In the weeks she'd been at the clubhouse, she'd watched Steele demonstrate the same qualities that had earned him military decorations. Leadership without ego, protection without expectation of gratitude, and a moral code that didn't bend based on convenience. I used to have nightmares, she said quietly, about the highway, about Tony and what he planned to do to me. But since I've been here, since I've felt safe, I dream about other things, better things. Good safety is something everyone deserves, even you. Steele looked surprised by the question. What do you mean? When do you get to feel safe? When do you get to put down the weight of being everyone's protector and just be Marcus instead of Steele? The use of his given name seemed to catch him off guard. Few people at the clubhouse used first names, and even fewer understood the burden of leadership he'd carried for so many years. I don't know, he admitted. Been so long since I've thought about it? Emma carefully placed all the items back in the wooden box, treating each piece with the respect it deserved. Maybe that's something we can figure out together. How to feel safe. The rhythm of life at the clubhouse settled into something Emma had never experienced before. Predictability wrapped in genuine care. Mornings began, before sunrise, with the sound of Steele's boots on the wooden floors as he prepared for another day of protecting his unconventional family. Emma had taken to rising early as well, drawn by the quiet moments when the clubhouse held the peaceful silence of a sleeping giant. She would find Steele on the back porch, coffee in hand, watching the desert come alive with the first light of dawn. Can't sleep either, she asked one morning, settling into the chair beside him with her own steaming mug. Old habit. In the service, dawn was when most attacks came. Or to shake the feeling that trouble arrives with the sunrise. Do you think they'll come back today? Steele sipped his coffee thoughtfully. It had been 3 weeks since Margaret and Tony's visit. 3 weeks of legal maneuvering through Rebecca Martinez, and 3 weeks of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Eventually. But not today. Today, we work on building something stronger than whatever they're planning. These morning conversations had become sacred time for both of them. Emma would share fragments of returning memories, and Steele would offer wisdom earned through years of hard experience. It was during one of these sessions that she noticed him working with a small piece of wood, his weathered hands moving with surprising delicacy. "What are you making?" she asked, watching as he carefully shaped the wood with a small knife. "Cross. My grandmother taught me to whittle when I was about your age. Said it kept idle hands busy and gave the mind time to think." Steele's knife work was precise, each cut deliberate and measured. She believed that making something beautiful was a way of praying without words. Emma watched, fascinated by the transformation taking place under his skilled hands. What had been a rough piece of desert wood was becoming something smooth and purposeful. "Was your grandmother religious?" "Deeply. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident. Every evening after dinner, she'd sit on her porch and whittle while she said her prayers. Made crosses for the church, little animals for the neighborhood kids, napkin rings for special occasions. What happened to her? Cancer took her when I was 17. Left me her tools and her wisdom about finding God in quiet moments." Steele paused in his work, examining the emerging cross from different angles. "She always said that faith wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up for people when they needed you most." As the days passed, Emma noticed that Steele's evening routine included time for whittling. After dinner, after the club business was concluded, after the last motorcycle had been tuned and the last dispute settled, he would sit with his wood and knife, creating small objects of unexpected beauty. "It's meditation for me," he explained one evening as Emma watched him work. "Helps quiet the noise in my head, the voices of people I couldn't save. Can you teach me?" Steele looked up from his work, surprised by the request. "It's not easy. Takes patience and practice. I have time." "And I think I need something to quiet my own noise." He handed her a small piece of soft pine and a basic knife. "Start with something simple. Feel the grain of the wood, understand how it wants to be shaped." Emma's first attempts were clumsy and frustrating. The knife felt foreign in her hands, and the wood seemed to resist her efforts to shape it. But Steele was patient, guiding her hands, showing her how to work with the natural grain rather than against it. "Like this," he said, covering her hands with his own to demonstrate the proper angle. "Let the wood tell you what it wants to become." Over the following weeks, their evening sessions became as routine as their morning conversations. Emma's skills improved gradually, and she began to understand the meditative quality Steele found in the work. The simple act of creating something beautiful from raw material felt like healing in physical form. "You're a natural," Steele observed one evening as Emma put the finishing touches on a small bird she'd been working on for days. "Grandmother would have liked you." "I wish I could have met her." "She's here," Steele said, tapping the wooden cross he'd been crafting. "In the skills she taught me, in the wisdom she passed down, in the way she showed me that love is something you do, not just something you feel." When Steele finished the cross, he sanded it smooth and polished it until the wood gleamed like amber. The piece was small enough to fit in Emma's palm, but its presence felt substantial, weighted with intention and care. "This is for you," he said, placing the cross in her hands. "Something to remind you that you're part of a family now, that you belong somewhere." Emma closed her fingers around the cross, feeling its smooth warmth. "Thank you for everything. For saving me, for taking me in, for treating me like family." "You are family," Steele replied simply. "Choice made you my daughter. Everything else is just paperwork." The official documents arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous process server who clearly understood he was entering territory where his legal authority carried less weight than it did in the outside world. Steele accepted the manila envelope with the same calm demeanor he'd shown when receiving mission briefings in Afghanistan, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders as he read the contents. "Petition for emergency custody and return of minor child," Steele read aloud, his voice steady despite the implications. "Margaret Elizabeth Holloway versus Marcus Rodriguez in the matter of Emma Jane Holloway." Emma felt her stomach drop. Seeing her name attached to Margaret's surname felt like a violation, a legal fiction that ignored the reality of who had actually cared for her during the most vulnerable period of her life. Rebecca Martinez arrived within an hour of Steele's phone call, her professional attire a stark contrast to the clubhouse's rough aesthetic. She was a small woman with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing, having built her reputation defending the rights of unconventional families against a system that often favored appearance over substance. "They're moving fast," Rebecca said, spreading the documents across the clubhouse's main table. "Emergency hearings scheduled for next week. They're claiming that Emma is being held against her will by a criminal organization." "Criminal organization?" Diesel laughed bitterly from his position at the bar. "We run a motorcycle repair business and help veterans adjust to civilian life. Real criminal enterprise there." Rebecca's expression remained serious. "Perception matters more than reality in family court. A judge who's never interacted with motorcycle clubs will see the leather, the tattoos, the reputation, and make assumptions." Emma studied the legal paperwork, noting how the language transformed her rescue into an abduction, her healing into imprisonment. "What are our chances?" "Honestly, in front of the wrong judge, not good. The biological parent has significant legal advantages, even when their parenting history is questionable." Rebecca pulled out a thick folder. "But I've been doing research on Margaret's background. 3 arrests for drug possession, 2 for prostitution, 1 for child endangerment from when Emma was 12. "Child endangerment?" Steele asked. "Emma was found alone in a motel room for 3 days while Margaret was on a bender. Social services investigated but couldn't prove abandonment because Margaret claimed she'd arranged for supervision." Emma's hand moved unconsciously to the wooden cross in her pocket. Steele's gift providing comfort in the face of painful memories slowly returning. "I remember that. I ate ketchup packets and stale crackers until the motel manager found me. The good news is that Emma is over 18, Rebecca continued. Technically, she's an adult capable of making her own decisions about where to live. Then why the custody petition? Steele asked. Because they're claiming Emma suffered traumatic brain injury and lacks the capacity to make informed decisions. They have a doctor's statement saying she shows signs of memory loss and potential cognitive impairment. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. If a court determined that Emma was mentally incompetent, Margaret could be granted guardianship with the authority to make all decisions about Emma's life, including where she lived and with whom she could associate. Dr. Chen's medical records show no evidence of cognitive impairment, Emma said. Just trauma-related memory issues that are resolving with time and proper support. Sarah's records will be crucial, Rebecca agreed. But we need to prepare for the possibility that the court will order an independent psychological evaluation. Ghost spoke up from his corner table. What about Tony? Guy like that doesn't pursue legal action unless there's money involved. Rebecca nodded. That's the question we need to answer. Why is Margaret suddenly so concerned about maternal rights? What changed? Steele had been quietly studying the court summons, noting details that others might miss. The lawyer representing Margaret. You know him? Thomas Brennan. High-end family law attorney. His retainer alone costs more than most people make in 6 months, so someone with serious money is funding this legal challenge, Steele concluded. Someone who wants Emma back for reasons that have nothing to do with maternal love. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert morning air. Tony said something when they were here, about family taking care of family, but he wasn't talking about emotional support. What do you think he meant? I think he meant that family is useful, that family can be leveraged, controlled, used. Emma's voice grew stronger as understanding dawned. I think someone needs me for something, and they're using Margaret as a legal front to get me back. Rebecca began packing up her papers. We have 1 week to prepare. I'll need detailed statements from everyone about Emma's condition when she arrived, her progress since then, and the circumstances of her rescue. Steele folded the court summons carefully, his expression grim but determined. What do you need from us? The truth, all of it, and preparation for the fact that they're going to paint this clubhouse as an unsuitable environment for a young woman. Let them try, Mama Rosa said firmly from the kitchen doorway. This girl has bloomed like a desert flower since she's been here. Any fool can see that. The threats started small, as they often do. A few hang-up calls during dinner, cars that drove by the clubhouse too slowly, men in suits asking questions at local businesses about the motorcycle club's activities. Steele recognized the pattern from his military days. Psychological pressure designed to create anxiety and force mistakes. Emma noticed the changes in the club's routine before anyone explained them to her. Extra men on watch duty, motorcycles moved into the garage overnight instead of left in the parking area, conversations that stopped when she entered the room. The easy camaraderie of the clubhouse had been replaced by the careful vigilance of people expecting trouble. It's not just legal pressure, Ghost explained during one of their evening conversations on the porch. Someone's testing our defenses, seeing how we respond to different types of provocation. You think it's Tony? Tony's a soldier, not a general. Someone's giving him orders, providing resources. Ghost's pale eyes scanned the desert horizon automatically, a habit formed during too many combat patrols. Question is, what do they really want? The answer came 3 days before the custody hearing, delivered with the morning mail like a snake hidden among ordinary correspondence. Mama Rosa found the envelope slipped under the front door. Emma's name written in block letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message cut from magazine letters like something from a bad television show. But the crude construction didn't diminish the impact of the words. Come home or watch your new family suffer. Steele studied the note with the clinical detachment of someone trained to analyze threats. Paper's standard office supply. Glue is fresh, probably assembled within the last day or two. Magazine letters suggest someone trying to avoid handwriting analysis. Amateur hour, Diesel observed, but his massive hands were clenched into fists. Real professionals don't announce their intentions. Emma held the note, feeling the weight of menace in such a simple piece of paper. This isn't about custody. This is about control. Agreed, Steele said. Someone wants you back, and they're willing to threaten everyone around you to make it happen. Rebecca Martinez arrived within the hour, her expression grim as she examined the threatening note. This changes everything. We need to involve law enforcement immediately. Won't help, Ghost said from his position near the window. Note's too vague to prove specific intent, and local cops won't provide round-the-clock protection for a motorcycle club. Then what do we do? Steele was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through tactical possibilities with the same methodical approach he'd used in Afghanistan. We do what we always do. We protect our family. You're talking about vigilante action, Rebecca warned. That could destroy our case in court. I'm talking about legitimate self-defense, Steele corrected. Someone's threatening violence against people under my protection. I have a legal right to take reasonable precautions. Emma watched the discussion with growing understanding of the impossible position she'd put these people in. By accepting their protection, she'd made them targets. By choosing this family over her biological one, she'd brought war to their doorstep. Maybe I should just go back, she said quietly. End this before someone gets hurt. The room fell silent. Steele looked at her with something approaching anger, the first time she'd seen such emotion directed her way. Don't ever say that again, he said, his voice low and intense. Family doesn't abandon family when things get difficult. That's what makes us different from the people who hurt you. But if someone gets hurt because of me, then someone gets hurt because criminals chose to use violence. Mama Rosa interrupted firmly. You didn't ask for this, child. You didn't create this situation. Diesel stood up from the table, his massive frame radiating controlled aggression. Besides, been too quiet around here lately. Might be fun to remind some people why they used to cross the street when they saw us coming. This isn't a joke, Rebecca said. If violence erupts, Emma could end up in state custody while the legal issues are resolved. Then we make sure violence doesn't erupt, Steele replied. We control the situation instead of letting it control us. Over the next 24 hours, the clubhouse transformed into something resembling a military compound. Steele coordinated with other chapters of the club, bringing in additional manpower and expertise. Security cameras appeared at strategic points around the property. Escape routes were planned and rehearsed. Emma found herself at the center of a protection detail that operated with clockwork precision. Never alone, never unguarded, never more than 30 seconds away from armed backup. It should have felt suffocating, but instead it felt like being wrapped in an invisible blanket of safety. You're scared, Sarah observed during Emma's daily medical check. Terrified, Emma admitted, but not of Tony or Margaret or whoever's behind this. I'm scared of losing this, of losing them. Sarah nodded with understanding. Fear of loss is different from fear of harm. It means you've found something worth protecting. How do I live with that? Knowing that loving these people puts them in danger. The same way they live with it, Sarah replied. One day at a time, with courage and determination. The attack came at 3 a.m, when the desert was at its quietest and most vulnerable. Emma jolted awake to the sound of shattering glass and Diesel's booming voice shouting orders from the main room. Years of military training had Steele moving before he was fully conscious, his hand automatically reaching for the weapon he kept in the nightstand beside his bed. Emma, stay down, he called through her door as boots thundered across the clubhouse floors. Don't come out until I give the all clear. From her window, Emma could see muzzle flashes in the darkness beyond the parking area. The attackers had come prepared. At least 6 men with automatic weapons attempting to establish positions around the clubhouse perimeter. But they'd underestimated both the defensive preparations and the combat experience of the men they were facing. Steele's voice cut through the chaos with the clarity of someone accustomed to commanding troops under fire. Ghost north side. Diesel, cover the garage. Rosa, get to the safe room. The main window of the clubhouse exploded inward as a burst of gunfire stitched across the wall where the pool table stood. Glass fragments scattered across the floor like deadly confetti, catching the emergency lighting in thousands of sharp reflections. Emma pressed herself against the floor of her room, feeling the building shake as Steele and his brothers returned fire with disciplined precision. "Amateurs!" she heard Ghost call out between bursts. No coordination, no fire discipline. "This is harassment, not a real assault." Steele's response was grim but controlled. Harassment that could turn deadly real quick. "Emma, you still down?" "I'm okay," she called back, though her hands were shaking as she clutched the wooden cross Steele had carved for her. The small piece of wood felt like an anchor in the storm of violence erupting around her. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, the clubhouse looked like a war zone. Bullet holes decorated the walls in random patterns. Furniture was overturned and splintered, and broken glass covered every surface. The smell of gunpowder and fear hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "All clear," Steele announced, but his voice carried the tension of someone still expecting trouble. "Emma, you can come out now." She emerged from her room to find Steele checking the perimeter while Ghost and Diesel assessed the damage. Mama Rosa appeared from the reinforced safe room that Steele had constructed behind the kitchen, her face pale but her eyes blazing with anger. "Cowards," Rosa spat, surveying the destruction. "Attacking in the dark like thieves and murderers. Anyone hurt?" Emma asked, noting that all three men moved with the careful precision of people checking for wounds. Diesel caught some glass fragments in his arm, but nothing serious, Steele reported. "They weren't trying to kill us." "This was a message." "What kind of message?" Ghost held up a piece of paper that had been wrapped around a brick and thrown through the front window. "The kind that makes their position very clear." Emma read the note with growing dread. "Last warning. Bring the girl to the warehouse on Industrial Road by midnight tomorrow, or next time we won't miss." Industrial Road, Steele mused. "That's cartel territory. Whoever's behind this has serious backing." The sound of approaching sirens filled the desert air, growing louder as multiple emergency vehicles raced toward the clubhouse. Emma felt a moment of relief before realizing that police involvement might complicate their situation even further. "What do we tell them?" she asked. "The truth," Rebecca Martinez said, appearing in the doorway with perfect timing. "Someone attacked a legal residence with automatic weapons. That's attempted murder, regardless of who lives here." The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, crime scene photography, and official statements. Detective Maria Santos, a no-nonsense veteran of the sheriff's department, seemed more interested in facts than assumptions about motorcycle clubs. This wasn't random, Santos concluded after examining the evidence. Professional weapons, coordinated timing, specific target selection. Someone wanted to send a message without necessarily killing anyone. "What's your assessment of the threat level?" Steele asked. "High and escalating. These people have resources and aren't afraid to use violence." Santos closed her notebook. "I'd recommend relocating until we can identify and apprehend the shooters." "This is our home," Rosa said firmly. "We don't run from bullies, even bullies with military-grade weapons." Steele looked around at the damaged clubhouse, noting how the attack had violated their sanctuary. "Detective, what's the timeline on your investigation?" "Could be weeks before we have enough evidence for arrests. These people covered their tracks professionally." Emma stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "The custody hearing is tomorrow." "This wasn't coincidence." "Agreed," Santos replied. "Someone's trying to influence legal proceedings through intimidation. That's a federal crime. Will federal involvement help or hurt our case?" Steele asked Rebecca. "Depends on how it's handled. But this attack proves that Emma needs protection, not forced reunification with people connected to violence." As dawn broke over the desert, Emma stood among the broken glass and bullet holes that had transformed her safe haven into a battlefield. The wooden cross in her palm felt warm and reassuring, a reminder that family meant standing together when the world turned dangerous. "We're not backing down," she told Steele as they watched the crime scene technicians finish their work. "I know," he replied. "That's what makes you family." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chen's colleague at County General, Dr. Patricia Williams, had been treating Margaret Holloway in the psychiatric ward for the past 6 months. When Sarah mentioned the custody case during a medical conference, Patricia's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine concern. Margaret Holloway is my patient, Patricia said quietly. And if someone's using her to pursue custody of a child, that child is in serious danger. The medical records that Patricia shared with Sarah, under strict confidentiality agreements and with proper legal authorization, painted a picture that changed everything about the custody battle. Margaret wasn't just a drug addict seeking rehabilitation. She was a severely mentally ill woman with a documented history of violence and psychotic episodes, paranoid schizophrenia with acute dissociative episodes. Sarah read from the psychiatric evaluation as Rebecca. Steele and Emma gathered in the clinic's conference room. Multiple hospitalizations for violent behavior, history of auditory and visual hallucinations commanding her to harm others. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as suppressed memories began surfacing with crystal clarity. I remember now, the voices she used to talk to, the way she'd stare at nothing for hours, then suddenly become violent. There's more, Sarah continued. Margaret has been declared mentally incompetent by the state twice in the past 5 years. She's currently under court-ordered psychiatric care and taking antipsychotic medication. Rebecca leaned forward, her legal mind immediately grasping the implications. If Margaret is mentally incompetent, she cannot legally petition for custody of anyone. Someone else is pulling the strings. Steele studied the medical records with the methodical approach he brought to all intelligence gathering. Who has power of attorney over her medical and legal decisions? That's where it gets interesting, Sarah replied, turning to another section of the file. Legal guardian is listed as Antonio Vega, appointed by the court after her last psychiatric hospitalization. Tony, Emma said, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. He's not just her boyfriend. He's her legal guardian, which means he can make all decisions about her life, including whether she pursues custody litigation, Rebecca concluded. Margaret isn't choosing to fight for Emma. Tony is using her as a legal front. The room fell silent as everyone processed this revelation. Margaret wasn't a desperate mother seeking redemption. She was a mentally ill woman being manipulated by someone with his own agenda. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice heavy with reluctance. Margaret's psychiatric history includes multiple incidents of child abuse. She was investigated by social services 7 times before Emma turned 16. Emma's hands trembled as more memories flooded back. The burns on my arms. I told people I was clumsy, that I fell against the stove. But she did that. During one of her episodes, she said voices told her I was evil. Steele's jaw tightened with controlled rage. Why wasn't she prosecuted? Mental illness defense, combined with lack of conclusive evidence. Social services removed Emma from the home twice, but Margaret would stabilize on medication and convince courts she was fit to regain custody. Until I ran away at 16, Emma said quietly. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the violence, never knowing which version of her I'd wake up to. Rebecca was already making notes, her mind working through legal strategies. This completely changes our defense. We're not fighting a custody battle. We're preventing the return of an abuse victim to her mentally ill abuser. But why does Tony want Emma back? Steele asked. What's his endgame? Sarah turned to the final section of Margaret's file. Financial records show Margaret received substantial disability payments from the state, plus Social Security benefits. As her guardian, Tony controls all of that money, but Emma's an adult now. How would getting custody increase his financial gain? Look at this. Sarah pointed to a recent addition to Margaret's file. Margaret recently inherited property from a deceased relative. A substantial estate worth several $1 million. Emma stared at the documents in shock. My great-aunt Helen. I remember Mom talking about her, but I thought she'd disowned our family years ago. Apparently not. The inheritance is complicated by family law. If Margaret is declared unfit to manage her affairs, and if she has no living children, the estate reverts to distant relatives. But if Emma is legally Margaret's dependent again, under Tony's guardianship, Rebecca's voice trailed off as she understood the full scope of the scheme. Then Tony controls both of them and the entire inheritance, Steele finished grimly. This was never about family. It was about money. Emma felt a mixture of relief and revulsion. Relief that her mother's pursuit wasn't motivated by genuine maternal feelings, but revulsion at the depth of Tony's manipulation. "So, what do we do with this information?" she asked. Rebecca was already reaching for her phone. "We file emergency motions to halt the custody proceedings and request a competency hearing for Margaret. We also contact Adult Protective Services about Tony's potential exploitation of a mentally ill person. And if Tony realizes we've uncovered his scheme." Steele's expression was grim but determined. "Then we prepare for him to escalate beyond legal pressure." "You mean more violence?" "I mean we prepare for whatever comes next, and we protect our family." The business card fell out of Margaret's purse during a supervised visit arranged by the court, fluttering to the floor like a leaf carrying poison. Emma noticed it first, a simple white rectangle with embossed lettering that Margaret quickly tried to retrieve. But Steele's trained eye had already catalogued the details. Vega Import-Export. Antonio Vega, International Trade Consultant. International Trade. Ghost muttered later as they examined the card in the privacy of Steele's room. "That's cartel speak for drug smuggling." Steele turned the card over, noting the quality of the paper and printing. This wasn't some small-time operation. The card represented serious money and professional organization. "Run the business name through your contacts at DEA," he told Ghost. "See what comes back." The answer arrived within hours, delivered through encrypted channels that Steele's military connections still provided. Antonio Vega wasn't just a guardian exploiting a mentally ill woman. He was a high-level lieutenant in the Sinaloa cartel's distribution network, responsible for moving product through California's inland corridors. "Gets worse," Ghost reported, reading from printouts that shouldn't have existed outside federal databases. "Vega's been under investigation for human trafficking, specifically using vulnerable women as drug mules and leverage against uncooperative business partners." Emma felt ice forming in her stomach as understanding dawned. "He doesn't want me back for Margaret's inheritance. He wants me back for the business." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked from her position near the window, where she'd been maintaining watch duty. "I worked at that diner in Barstow for 2 years. I knew everyone, saw everything. Truckers, suppliers, local law enforcement." Emma's voice grew stronger as pieces of a larger puzzle clicked into place. "I probably witnessed dozens of illegal transactions without understanding what I was seeing." Steele leaned forward in his chair, his tactical mind working through implications. "You're a liability. Someone who could identify people, routes, methods, or I'm an asset," Emma corrected. "Someone who knows the territory, the players, the patterns. Someone who could be very useful to a criminal organization." "Jesus," Diesel breathed from the doorway. "This isn't about custody or inheritance. This is about recruitment." Rebecca Martinez arrived an hour later, bringing with her a federal agent whose presence transformed the clubhouse meeting from family discussion to law enforcement briefing. Agent Maria Santos introduced herself as part of a joint task force investigating cartel operations in the southwestern United States. "We've been tracking Vega's organization for 3 years, Santos explained, spreading photographs and surveillance reports across the main table. He specializes in what we call soft recruitment, identifying vulnerable individuals and manipulating them into cooperation through a combination of financial pressure, family threats, and emotional manipulation, like using someone's mentally ill mother to force compliance." Steele observed, "Exactly. Margaret Holloway has been in Vega's control for over a year. He provides her medications, manages her finances, and uses her as a front for various operations." Emma studied the surveillance photos, recognizing locations from her childhood and young adulthood. That warehouse on Industrial Road where they wanted to meet. "I delivered food there from the diner. Always thought it was strange that they only ordered during night shifts. Drug processing and packaging facility," Santos confirmed. "We've been building a case, but we need witnesses who can testify about operations, identify key players, establish patterns of activity." "And you think Emma can provide that testimony?" "I think Emma is the key to dismantling a significant portion of Vega's network, which is why he's willing to risk legal exposure to get her back." Steele's expression darkened as the full scope of the threat became clear. He's not going to stop with legal pressure or harassment. If he can't get her cooperation, he'll eliminate her as a potential witness. That's our assessment as well, Santos agreed. Which is why we're prepared to offer federal protection in exchange for Emma's cooperation with our investigation. Emma looked around the room at the faces of people who'd become her family, understanding that accepting federal protection would mean leaving them behind. What kind of cooperation? Witness testimony about activities you observed at the diner and other locations. Help identifying faces in surveillance footage. Assistance in understanding the operational patterns you witnessed, and in exchange, new identity, relocation, full protection until the trials are concluded. How long? Santos hesitated. Could be years. Vega's organization has connections throughout the Southwest. Even after arrests and convictions, there might be retaliation concerns. Steele stood and walked to the window, his shoulders tense with the weight of impossible decisions. What if we don't cooperate? What if we handle this ourselves? Then you're fighting a war against an organization with unlimited resources and no moral constraints, Santos replied. And eventually you'll lose. Emma felt the wooden cross in her pocket, its familiar weight providing comfort in the face of an impossible choice. Can I have time to think about it? Some, but not much. Our intelligence suggests Vega is planning to escalate operations within the next 72 hours. Escalate how? Santos's expression was grim. Direct action. No more legal maneuvering, no more harassment. If he can't get you back through manipulation, he'll take you by force. The combat knife lay on Steele's workbench like a relic from another lifetime, its blade reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the garage. Emma had never seen him handle the weapon before, but she recognized the reverence in his movements as he cleaned and sharpened the carbon steel with methodical precision. Kabar fighting knife, he explained without looking up from his work. Standard issue for Marine Force reconnaissance. Carried this through 3 tours in Afghanistan. Are you expecting hand-to-hand combat? Steele tested the blade's edge against a piece of paper, nodding with satisfaction as it sliced cleanly through. I'm expecting anything. In my experience, when you're dealing with people who traffic in human misery, preparation for the worst-case scenario is just good planning. The decision had been made the night before. After hours of discussion and tactical assessment, Emma would not accept federal protection that meant abandoning the family who'd saved her. Instead, they would handle Tony Vega and his organization the way Steele's Brotherhood had always handled threats to their own. Directly, decisively, and with overwhelming force. Agent Santos thinks we're making a mistake, Emma said, watching Steele attach the knife to his tactical vest with practiced efficiency. Agent Santos has procedures to follow and bureaucracy to navigate. We have a family to protect. Steele looked up from his preparations, his eyes carrying the same focused intensity she'd seen in photographs from his military service. Sometimes the right choice and the legal choice aren't the same thing. Ghost emerged from the main clubhouse, carrying a detailed map of the industrial district where intelligence suggested Vega's operation was centered. Surveillance reports show at least 12 men, rotating shifts, professional security setup. Weapons, automatic rifles, body armor, communications equipment. These aren't street-level dealers. They're military contractors working for cartel money. Diesel joined them in the garage, his massive frame encased in tactical gear that made him look like a walking fortress. Brothers from the Riverside and San Bernardino chapters are en route. Should have 25 men total. Steele nodded, his strategic mind working through deployment options. This isn't about overwhelming them with numbers. It's about precision, speed, and getting Emma to safety before they can respond. What's the primary objective? Emma asked, understanding that she was witnessing the transformation of her adopted father from protector to warrior. Extract Margaret from Vega's control, neutralize the immediate threat to our family, and gather enough evidence to ensure federal prosecution, Steele replied. In that order. Emma felt a chill at the clinical way he discussed what amounted to a military assault on a criminal organization. And if something goes wrong, then we adapt and overcome. That's what Marines do. Rebecca Martinez arrived as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, her face grim with legal concerns and moral uncertainty. "I have to advise you that what you're planning constitutes vigilante action. If anyone is hurt, if any laws are broken, it could destroy everything we've built in Emma's case." "The case is already destroyed," Steele replied, adjusting the tactical radio clip to his vest. "Vega's not going to stop with legal maneuvering. He's escalating to direct violence, which means the law can't protect Emma anymore. Federal agents could start a process that takes months or years to resolve," Ghost interrupted. "We don't have months. According to intelligence, Vega's planning to move against us tonight." Emma moved to Steele's workbench, where he'd laid out additional equipment with military precision. Night vision goggles, flashbang grenades, zip-tie restraints, and medical supplies that spoke to the serious nature of what they were planning. "You're really going to war for me," she said quietly. Steele paused in his preparations, looking at her with the same gentle expression she'd seen during their morning conversations on the porch. "Family is worth fighting for. Some things are worth the risk, even if it costs you everything. Emma, I've been a warrior for most of my adult life. First for my country, then for my brotherhood. But I've never fought for something as important as this." Steele picked up the combat knife, sliding it into its sheath with a definitive click. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a survivor." Mama Rosa appeared in the garage doorway, her face showing the strain of watching her family prepare for battle. "Dinner's ready. You should all eat something before you go." The meal was quiet, filled with the unspoken understanding that not everyone might return. Emma found herself memorizing faces, voices, the easy camaraderie that had become her world. Steele sat beside her, his presence both reassuring and terrifying in its contained violence. "Promise me something," Emma said as they finished eating. "Anything. Promise me you'll come back. All of you." Steele touched the combat knife at his side, feeling its familiar weight. "We'll come back, and we'll end this." As darkness fell over the desert, the clubhouse transformed into a staging area for an operation that would either secure Emma's freedom or destroy the family that had saved her. The choice had been made. Now came the execution. The photograph had been taken 3 weeks earlier by Mama Rosa, capturing an unguarded moment during one of their evening gatherings on the clubhouse porch. Emma sat beside Steele on the old wooden bench, both of them laughing at something Ghost had said, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the setting sun. It was the first picture that truly showed them as father and daughter, not rescued and rescuer. Steele held the photograph carefully as he sat alone in his room, the tactical gear laid out around him like the tools of a trade he'd hoped to leave behind. In 2 hours, he would lead his brothers into battle against an enemy that threatened everything he'd come to cherish. The picture reminded him exactly what he was fighting to preserve. Emma knocked softly on his doorframe, already knowing he would be awake. Sleep had become impossible for both of them as the operation drew near. "Can't rest, either?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Old habits. Before every mission in Afghanistan, I'd spend the final hours thinking about what I was coming home to." Steele showed her the photograph. Never had something this good to come home to before. Emma studied the picture, seeing herself through his eyes. In the image, she looked happy, healthy, at peace in a way she'd never experienced before finding this family. "I look different. You look like you belong somewhere. I do belong somewhere. Here, with all of you." Emma's voice carried a quiet certainty that had grown stronger with each passing day. "That's why I can't let you do this alone." Steele looked up sharply. "We discussed this. You stay here with Rosa, under protection, until we get back. And if you don't get back, what happens to me then?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying weight that Steele couldn't easily dismiss. If the operation went wrong, if he and his brothers didn't return, Emma would be left defenseless against Vega's organization. Agent Santos offered federal protection, he reminded her. Federal protection means witness relocation. New identity, new life, cut off from everyone who matters to me. Emma reached for the photograph, tracing Steele's face with her finger. "I'd rather fight beside my family than hide from my enemies. Emma, you taught me to maintain motorcycles, to defend myself, to think strategically." You gave me the tools to be strong." Her voice carried echoes of the man who'd raised her. "Now let me use them." Steele was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind warring with his protective instincts. "What are you proposing?" "I know the warehouse where they're holding Margaret. I delivered food there dozens of times. I know the layout, the security patterns, the blind spots." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "You need intelligence from someone who's been inside. Intelligence we can get from surveillance. Surveillance can't tell you that the loading dock door sticks and makes noise when it opens, or that there's a ventilation shaft that connects the office area to the main floor, or that the security cameras have a 15-second delay between recording and transmission." Steele studied her face, seeing determination that reminded him of the Marines he'd served with in Afghanistan. "You're serious about this?" "Completely serious. This is my fight too, Steele. Vega wants to use me as leverage against everyone I care about. I'm not going to hide while the people I love risk their lives to protect me." From the main room came the sound of motorcycles arriving as brothers from other chapters joined their small army. Steele could hear Ghost coordinating final preparations, Diesel checking weapons and equipment, Rosa preparing medical supplies for casualties they all hoped wouldn't come. "If you come with us, you follow orders without question," Steele said finally. "You stay behind cover, you don't engage unless absolutely necessary, and you get out at the first sign the operation is going wrong." "Agreed. And you understand that this isn't a game. People are going to get hurt tonight. Maybe killed. Once we cross this line, there's no going back." Emma nodded, her hand moving unconsciously to the wooden cross in her pocket. "I understand, but these people threatened our family. They turned my mother into a weapon against me. They need to face consequences." Steele carefully placed the photograph in his wallet, positioning it where he could see Emma's face if he opened it. The image would remind him what he was fighting for during the dark hours ahead. "Your gear is in the closet," he said, standing to retrieve a tactical vest sized for her smaller frame. "Rosa insisted on body armor. Said if we were crazy enough to take you into battle, we'd damn well better bring you back alive." Emma slipped on the vest, feeling its weight settle around her shoulders like protective embrace. "How do I look?" "Like someone I'm proud to call daughter," Steele replied. "Like someone worth fighting for. And like someone ready to fight back." Outside, engines roared to life as the convoy prepared to move out. The calm before the storm was ending, and the battle for Emma's freedom was about to begin. The warehouse squatted in the industrial darkness like a concrete beast, its few exterior lights creating pools of sickly yellow illumination that only emphasized the surrounding shadows. Steele's convoy had approached in complete silence. Motorcycles pushed rather than ridden for the final half-mile to avoid alerting Vega's security teams. Emma crouched beside Steele behind a shipping container, studying the building she'd visited dozens of times as an innocent delivery driver. Now seeing it through tactical eyes, she understood why Vega had chosen this location. Multiple escape routes, clear fields of fire, and legitimate business activity to mask illegal operations. "Count," Steele whispered into his radio. 12 visible, probably 6 more inside." Ghost's voice crackled back from his overwatch position on a nearby building. 2 on the roof, 4 patrolling the perimeter, 6 stationed at entry points." "Margaret?" "Movement in the office windows, 2nd floor. At least 2 figures, 1 female." Steele checked his watch. "Midnight exactly. Time to end this. All teams, execute on my mark." The assault began with Ghost's sniper rifle, eliminating the rooftop sentries in near-perfect silence. Diesel's team moved against the loading dock while Steele led Emma and 2 other brothers toward the side entrance she'd identified as the weakest. "Point to the old door." Handle turned exactly as Emma had predicted, years of weather having warped the frame enough to compromise the lock. They slipped inside just as automatic weapons fire erupted from the main entrance, signaling that Vega's people had detected the assault. "Stairs to the office level," Emma whispered, pointing through the darkness to a metal staircase barely visible in the emergency lighting. Steele moved with the fluid precision of someone returning to a familiar environment. Combat was his natural element, and Emma could see the transformation from protective father to lethal warrior happening in real time. They climbed the stairs as gunfire echoed through the warehouse below. Diesel's booming voice could be heard over the chaos, shouting orders as his team engaged Vega's soldiers in a firefight that sounded like the end of the world. The office door was locked, but Steele's boot made short work of the cheap wood. Inside, they found Margaret cowering in a corner while Tony Vega stood at the window, watching his operation disintegrate below. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Vega said without turning around. "Though I expected federal agents, not a motorcycle gang playing soldier." "Marines don't play soldier," Steele replied, his rifle trained on Vega's center mass. "We are soldiers." Margaret looked up at Emma with eyes that flickered between lucidity and madness. "Emma, baby, is that really you?" "I'm here, Mom." Emma moved carefully toward her mother, noting the restraints around Margaret's wrists. "We're going to get you out of here." "Touching reunion," Vega sneered, finally turning to face them. "But pointless. Even if you kill me, my organization will hunt down everyone you care about." "There's no escape from what you've started." "Maybe not," Steele agreed. "But there's justice." The gunfire below was intensifying, punctuated by the distinctive crack of Ghost's rifle, picking off targets with surgical precision. Empty shell casings began falling like metallic rain from the catwalk, where muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. "Your men are professionals," Steele observed, listening to the tactical discipline evident in their defensive movements. "Military contractors. Former special forces. Mexican army. Some American mercenaries." Vega smiled with cold confidence. "Better trained than your motorcycle gang." "Maybe, but they're fighting for money. We're fighting for family." As if summoned by his words, Diesel's voice roared over the gunfire. "Steele, you got what you came for?" "Working on it." Steele called back, never taking his eyes off Vega. Emma had managed to free Margaret's restraints, but her mother was clearly in the grip of a severe psychological episode. "The voices are so loud," Margaret whispered. "They told me to bring you home, but I don't remember what home looks like anymore." "It's okay, Mom. We're going to find you help." "Real help," Vega laughed bitterly. "Help? She's been under psychiatric care for months. There is no help for what she's become." "There's help," Emma said firmly. "And there's hope. Something you'll never understand." The office window exploded inward as a stray bullet shattered the glass. In the chaos that followed, Vega drew a concealed pistol, but Steele's combat reflexes were faster. The rifle shot echoed in the small space like thunder. As Tony Vega fell, empty shell casings scattered across the office floor, joining hundreds more that littered the warehouse below. The brass cylinders caught the emergency lighting like golden coins, each one representing a life-or-death decision in the battle for Emma's freedom. "Target down," Steele reported into his radio. "Package secured. Beginning extraction." The gunfire below was already diminishing as Vega's surviving men realized their employer was dead and their paycheck had just evaporated. Professional soldiers might fight for money, but they rarely died for it. Emma helped Margaret to her feet, supporting her mother's weight as they prepared to leave the office where so much planning and suffering had originated. "It's over," she told Steele. "This part is," he agreed, but his eyes remained watchful. "Now comes the hard part, helping her heal." 6 months later, Emma stood in the Kern County Courthouse wearing the same leather jacket Steele had given her, but everything else had changed. The adoption papers in her hands represented the legal culmination of a journey that had begun on a dark highway and led through violence, healing, and ultimately to something resembling peace. "Emma Rodriguez," she said aloud, testing the sound of her new legal name. It felt right in a way that surprised her, as if the bureaucratic process had finally caught up with an emotional reality that had existed for months. Judge Patricia Henley smiled from behind the bench, her expression warm despite the formal setting. "Congratulations, Miss Rodriguez. And congratulations to you as well, Mr. Rodriguez. I've rarely seen an adoption case with such compelling evidence of genuine family bonds." Steele sat beside Emma in the front row, wearing a suit that made him look uncomfortable but dignified. Behind them, the entire Crossroads chapter had gathered to witness the legal recognition of what they'd always known to be true. Diesel wiped his eyes with a handkerchief that looked absurdly small in his massive hands. This court finds that the adoption is in the best interests of both parties, Judge Henley continued. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Miss Rodriguez has thrived under Mr. Rodriguez's care and guidance. Furthermore, the resolution of the criminal matters surrounding this case has eliminated any outstanding legal obstacles. Margaret sat in the back of the courtroom, her presence a testament to the complicated nature of healing and forgiveness. The months of proper psychiatric treatment had restored much of her mental clarity, though she would always require medication and supervision. She'd insisted on attending the adoption hearing, wanting to see her daughter find the family she herself had been unable to provide. "I'm proud of you, baby," Margaret had whispered to Emma before the hearing began. "You found something I never could give you. Real family." The criminal case against Vega's organization had concluded with multiple convictions and life sentences. Federal prosecutors had been impressed by the evidence gathered during the warehouse operation, though they'd chosen to overlook the unconventional methods used to obtain it. Justice sometimes required a flexible interpretation of procedure. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in the second row, her relationship with Steele having evolved from professional to personal over the months of Emma's recovery. She'd become an unofficial member of the extended family, providing medical care and emotional support. As the club adjusted to its newest member, the adoption papers will be filed immediately, Judge Henley announced. "Miss Rodriguez, you are now legally the daughter of Marcus Rodriguez, with all rights and responsibilities that entails." Emma looked down at the official documents, noting how the formal language attempted to capture something that transcended legal definitions. Marcus Rodriguez hereby adopts Emma Jane Rodriguez as his lawful daughter. Simple words that represented the most important decision either of them had ever made. After the ceremony, the group gathered at the clubhouse for a celebration that had been planned for weeks. Mama Rosa had prepared enough food to feed an army, and the parking area filled with motorcycles as friends from other chapters arrived to mark the occasion. "Speech," Diesel called out as the evening wound down, his voice carrying across the desert air. Steele stood reluctantly, clearly more comfortable with action than words. "Most of you know I'm not much for speeches, but today seems like a good time to say something about family." He looked around at the assembled faces. These men and women who'd chosen each other as brothers and sisters, despite having no blood connections. Family isn't about where you come from. It's about who shows up when you need them most. It's about who's willing to fight for you, to stand with you, to help you become the person you're meant to be. Emma felt the wooden cross in her pocket, its familiar weight a reminder of all the evening conversations on the porch, all the patient lessons in the garage, all the moments when Steele had chosen to be a father instead of just a protector. "Emma taught us something important," Steele continued. "She taught us that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is choosing love over hatred, choosing family over blood, choosing to build something better than what the world handed you." As the celebration continued around them, Emma and Steele found themselves back on the familiar porch where so many important conversations had taken place. The desert stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving, but somehow less threatening now. "Any regrets?" Steele asked, settling into his usual chair. Emma looked down at the adoption papers, then out at the family that had gathered to celebrate her legal recognition as Steele's daughter. "None. This is exactly where I belong." "Good, because you're stuck with us now. I'm counting on it." The stars emerged one by one in the clear desert sky, silent witnesses to a family that had been forged through choice rather than chance, strengthened by adversity, and now blessed with the legal recognition of bonds that had always existed in their hearts.